Hey, Helen.
Hi, Pete.
Hey, I'm so stoked to have you here today to talk about your book. Thank you, everybody, for joining us as part of our virtual summit here on Camp Modern Sales. As everyone knows, we love to have the latest and the greatest sales leadership authors as participants in our MSP virtual summits, and Helen is our latest and greatest. So, Helen, thank you very much for joining us. Helen, maybe you can give a little context for folks around your background in sales leadership and how like where you've been leading sales organizations over your career.
Great, love to. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So, my whole career has been in tech, actually. I started as an engineer in Silicon Valley and then made my way into marketing and then sales. So, I've worked for large organizations like IBM and Apple and Sun Microsystems and Microsoft, and also some smaller startups that probably folks haven't heard because they've been acquired or went out of business. But I've been leading sales teams for over 25 years and, mostly at Sun and at Microsoft.
Nice. I mean, Microsoft obviously has a vaunted sales organization, a little bit different than Sun's, I suppose, because Sun was, like, selling a big iron back in the day when people actually bought their own iron to
Yeah.
put into the data center. What sort of like segments and products were your sales teams doing at Microsoft over your time there? Just so
Yeah,
folks can understand like the sales motion that you have like familiarity with and what have you.
right. Yeah, so good question. So I led for a few years, I led a team focused on the Internet of Things,
Oh,
IoT devices,
mhm.
and we were selling Windows embedded software to device manufacturers. And
Wow.
then, yeah, and then in another role, I was the global sales leader for Windows. And in that role, helped empower teams to sell the latest and greatest, which at that time was Windows endpoint security product
Mhm.
and managed desktop. And then most recently, I led a global accounts team, calling on accounts like Honeywell and Intel and Boeing. And my team sold the whole shebang, the whole product line.
Wow.
But of course, working with specialist sellers and things like that.
Mhm.
So my team were the relationship managers and accountable for the account. And then we had an extended team of product sellers and customer success leaders and things like that.
I mean, that's crazy. I mean, unsurprising that you have so much exposure to different types of sales motions. And the reason why that was kind of in my pre-call planning when I was looking at your background, I was like, oh, wow, these different teams, because I mean, I think different sales motions have different kind of like fussinesses to them. So like the most recent one you were saying, like being a relationship owner, and then, but like obviously Microsoft has a massive portfolio of products. So like not every account owner is going to be able to understand all the different things. So now like you're coordinating with overlays, and of course that's different than being a individual seller going after like a single product or a single solution or what have you. And so like different management requirements for each of these things, right? Like one is going to be a more evangelical sale where you're like kicking down the door and like really like shoving a product into the hands. Another one is like maintaining a relationship and like doing a lot of coordination, a lot of quarterbacking. So sounds like you a whole gamut there, and I imagine that like the different managerial lessons from each are a little bit different, which probably is what like led you to your book. So maybe you can share with folks um, what kind of like motivated you to write the book. And if I recall correctly, the book's Love Your Team. I need to have one right here, but I don't have
Okay,
one.
you can see it. Oh
Here, put it in front of you. There it is.
no!
Hey, I love your team.
Okay, give
Um,
me my book.
I
Yeah, Love Your
know.
Team, a survival guide for sales managers in a hybrid world. And what motivated me was, if you recall, in July of 21, when the great resignation was happening,
Yeah.
4 million people a month resigning, I was doing a keynote about retaining top talent.
Hmm.
And I was reflecting on, okay, what do managers really need to do to retain talent? And what was authentic for me was they need to love their team.
Hmm.
And so I put that on the slide. And I got to tell you, I was nervous about it, like using the L word in a business context.
Especially in sales. Oh, we're tough around here.
Oh,
Oh yeah, carry.
it's what. And so then I unpacked it, right? I said, okay, love as in an action. Like find out what your sellers care about on their terms. Figure out what you can do to support them achieving that. So it might be maximizing quota. It might be flexibility. It might be work-life balance. It might be getting promoted. There's a raft of things that sellers care about. And remove friction, remove blockers, use your positional power to help them get higher in the organization. And so, it's selling, and a manager's job, in my opinion, is all about supporting their team.
Hmm.
To me, that's common sense, but I've learned it's not always common practice.
Yeah.
So
So
I got
this
a
was the
lot of,
present. You were giving a presentation on this, and
yeah.
it sounded like it landed, and you were like, you know what? I need to make a book out of this.
Well, then I got a lot of questions. Well, how do you go about doing that? What exactly does that mean? Oh, and by the way, what I'm talking about that managers need to do with their sellers to build trust and relationship and support them are exactly the same thing that sellers need to do with customers.
Yes,
Hello.
totally.
So you're basically modeling what you expect your sellers to do to understand what matters to the customer on their terms and help provide it. So yeah, so anyways, that was the motivation or the kernel of an idea that then led to me writing this book.
I love it. I love it. It's absolutely fantastic. I think that insight that you just dropped around that, like good sales management, and like honestly, I think like good management in general is very similar to sales, was something that I kind of had an aha around. I think it was like 2 years ago at this point when because I come from a very operationally rigorous, analytically orientated kind of like school of sales management, where it's like it's numbers, it's a factory, it's all inputs, intermediaries, and outputs, and what have you. And um and and like I think the important thing is to remember is like, yeah, it is a factory. The modern sales is about like instrumenting and like measuring and making sure that the factory is running. But in this case, like it's not CNC machines and like fabricators and whatever. It's people, right? And like people are squishy, and they have feelings, and they have limbic systems, and so on and so forth. And so it's really important for us to remember that. And so as a manager, you have to remember that. And then the other thing too is that like how you motivate people to do a thing is very similar. How do you motivate or like reveal and motivate to a prospect like a problem that they're having, that like maybe they knew about, or maybe they didn't know about, or maybe they didn't want to admit that they had it, or what have you. And so then what you want to do is like, so reveal that to them, and then like show them the path to the better future state. Well, sounds like a really great mechanism for management as well. And I remember reading Corey Bray's 5 Secrets of the Sales Coach, kind of like talking that. I was like, man, this seems like a qualification call right here that this manager is having. And sure enough, like that's kind of what was going on. So maybe what you can do is share a little bit about like, what people would expect to kind of learn in your book, because we're sending them to folks who are attending the virtual summit who have signed up for them. So what's in store for people if they haven't, like when it shows up to them, and if folks haven't signed up yet, that would motivate them to do so.
Yeah, for sure. So the bulk of the book are the 17 core conversations that
Hmm.
leaders need to have with their team. So as I was reflecting on what I do as a sales leader, I have conversations. So I distilled that into 17 core conversations.
Hmm.
The first category of conversations are 5 conversations around what I call conversations of connection.
Mm.
And they're really the foundation for building trust and relationship with your team. And for example, the first one is, great, you've been hired as a new leader and you're taking over a team that more likely than not already exists. So
Mm,
how do you introduce yourself to your team? Now
mhm.
that might seem obvious, but it's not, because I've been on the receiving end of it not being so great.
Someone doing it bad. Nothing. Yeah, nothing better.
Basically,
Nothing.
yeah.
Very few things as good as a good bad example. Don't do, don't don't do that.
Not naming names, but it's really about what the team needs to know about you, the new leader. And so I break it down. I go, okay, here's how I do it. I tell them a little bit about myself, like my career, why this job is so exciting, my family situation, the fact that I'm married, have a couple of kids. Um, and then, a few fun facts, like where I like to travel, Italy, what I like to drink, Chardonnay and bourbon, not together. Um,
Whoa.
yeah. And then I go into what is my leadership approach and management philosophy? Like, what do I care about? Like,
Mhm,
clear, outcome based performance expectations. So clear expectations, straight conversation, no surprises. Let's like
mhm,
talk about what's really going on. People first. We perform as a team and as individuals, but if the team's not doing okay, or an individual's not doing okay, then it's not great, right? Then you can't show up great to work. So those are a few examples. I have like 6 or 7, which I have in the book.
mhm,
And then lastly, what next steps? So
mhm,
then what I do is I have a one-on-one with all my direct reports, one at a time. And it's, don't prepare. I want to learn about you. I want to understand, get to know you.
right.
And then if it's a big team, I'll endeavor to get together with others. It might be a 5 or 6 people, a little intimate round table, virtual round table. But anyways, that's an example of the first conversation. And
Mhm,
every conversation chapter is set up the same. Here's how traditional managers do it. Here's how love
mhm.
your team managers do it. How to
I
recognize
like that.
the need for the conversation, the outcome, expected, how to conduct the conversation, how to assess whether or not it worked, and then some tips. So
I, l-
that's
I love it. It's like a recipe, paint by numbers. Well, one thing that kind of like pops to mind, that that as you're kind of delineating this is what that sounded like. This sounds like a very like elongated discovery conversation, and I think one of the things that so another one of my favorite sales books is written by John McMahon. He's so the qualified sales leader. He's been a presenter and a participant in a number of MSP summits. And one of the things he always talks about, so of course, John McMahon, CRO, PTC on the board at Snowflake, et cetera, father of MedPick, always talks about like continually qualifying. Like you can't, you don't, it doesn't just happen once, right? Like, doing more and more discovery as you go along. And I think what you're kind of talking about right here that I'm excited when I get a chance to read the book, is like, but the way that you get deeper discovery and get people to open up to you is you want them to be comfortable with you to begin with, right? And like it's funny, like oftentimes my reps will want to skip the rapport part of a sales call, um, and either A, they'll want to skip it, or B, they'll like half-ass it, and like, oh, how's the weather there or whatever, like, which of course is just like a massively missed opportunity, right? Versus just doing a little bit of pre-call planning, to like guide the conversation, like, okay, I know that they're located here, I looked at what their major was, I looked at their past companies, et cetera, cool. And then not only just doing that on the first call, but just making sure that you do that on every call. Now, of course, like you only have 30 minutes, you have to budget like 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, but like you can get a lot in there, right? And so what's you're describing that's like really resonating to me is, hey, like we're gonna have a long relationship with this seller, right? And so dedicating like the first call purely potentially to rapport building, right? Such that when we get to our next call 101, right? Then we can get into like real discovery stuff, like, hey, like, what's your motivator? Oh, I have, $50,000 of college debt that I want to get out from under. Okay, wonderful, fantastic, like, motivator that we're going to then use as a mechanism by which to motivate you as we continue. So I love that, like, the number one is the kind of like very focus on getting like you sharing with them, and then also them sharing with you. um, One of the things I really love to do with my reps, one, from a managerial standpoint, is get that information about like what that makes them tick, what they're really excited about, and then recurrently showing them that I remembered it. And like, and it, like, so one of our senior AEs here at Atrium is a gentleman named Peter Bureau. And he's like, I mean, we're all sales nerds here, but he's a particularly big sales nerd. And so he loves Legos. He loves like very complicated Lego sets. And so like every quarter or so, my son, my 5-year-old Mikey, he really likes Legos too. So we're washing Legos at our house. And so when I'm buying more Legos, I'll like get like one of the advanced adult ones for Peter and just like drop it on his desk, right? So the next time he's like sick at home or whatever, he has the opportunity to do that. And so like, you can do these like small things, and they're like, $30, or even just sending people text message. What are some of your favorite ways of like showing your team love along those personal vectors, right? Not like performance coaching or whatever, like showing them that love.
Well, one of the things is I, get to know who they care about. So their family members. And, if their goal is to go run a marathon, how are they doing? Checking in to see how are they doing, against that goal. And in fact, a lot of my team members, believe it or not, I had never, even still to this day, I've never met in person. Now, I
Right.
left Microsoft in March, so a lot of the more recent connection was virtual, or I may send them something that I know would be they would care about given kind of what they're up to in their life. So send them a little gift or something like that. So just trying to make those connections. I also just think it's important to say that this approach that
Mhm.
I'm proposing is pragmatic. It's really about driving and exceeding business results.
Right.
Um, Leaders, especially sales leaders, they can't be successful unless they can retain their top talent.
Right.
And the cost of losing top talent, it really puts them at jeopardy of missing quota. And
Yep.
so this is pragmatic, but it's also, business oriented. So the next category of conversation is actually about sending performance management, setting outcome-based performance goals,
Yep.
tracking progress, and then addressing underperformers, where there's a gap, and giving that person an opportunity to step out or step up or help them step out.
Yep.
Because you just can't have a high performing team unless you're addressing the gaps in performance as well.
Yeah, and I think the challenge there is that that's the sort of thing that especially like new managers are oftentimes, very afraid of those conversations because they haven't done the repetitions, right?
Mhm.
Um, it's one of the things that we shipped recently at Atrium is a new AI driven sales coach functionality that essentially helps interpret the message. Like Atrium does data driven sales management software. It provides managers, the data and the metrics in order to measure and manage and improve team performance. But one of the things that oftentimes managers would leave short is like they'd have now awareness of the fact that this rep had a pipeline hygiene problem, but then what do I do about it? Right? Like, how do I like, oh, okay, well, like you should calendar time with this rep on a recurring basis in order to do pipeline management. Like, so like diagnosing the issue is all well and good, but then prescribing the fix is like the next step there. And oftentimes managers are like they could be aware of the problem, right? They're like, man, I just know that Bobby's got a pipeline hygiene problem. But if you're afraid of having that performance conversation or don't know exactly what to prescribe, like knowing, actually the CRO at SalesLoft has this great phrase, like, let's not admire a problem, let's not admire a problem, right? Let's fix it. And I think that the more that managers can be comfortable having those candid performance conversations in a maybe to kind of quote like your book in a loving way, in a supporting way, um, that like that's part and parcel of like what's required. And also there's doing the first bit of like earning the trust and what have you. Like we're not doing that just for the fun of it. We're doing it such that we can we can make recommendations such that we can prescribe solutions, again, just like a seller. So maybe you can kind of talk through some of the best practices that you recommend there in those more performance oriented conversations.
Yeah, sure. So I found that typically sellers aren't, binary. They're not terrible in everything and great in everything. So it's nuanced. So there are
Yeah.
elements. So you've got to, as a manager, call out where the gap is. And to take your example on pipeline hygiene, I mean, it's kind of ante into the game, and they probably get a salary for doing what's expected, and then get get compensation for achieving quota.
Right.
So I like to refer to Brene Brown that clarity is kind.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Yep.
absolutely convicted in myself, so inside of myself from experience, that it's actually, if it's not working for me as a manager, it's not going to be working for them.
Mm-hmm.
And the sooner you can nip it in the bud or give them that opportunity to correct and step up, the better off everyone will be. Because I have seen examples where performance goes on, issues go on because a
Yep.
manager hasn't addressed it.
Yep.
And then they're angry and it's spun out
Yes.
of control and it's past the point of no return.
Yep.
And you're creating a lot of stress. And one of the things that, so why love your team for a manager? There's three reasons. One of them is it creates clarity about what your job is and what it's not. It's to support your team and call out the gaps, but it's up to your team to deliver and do the job, not you doing it for them.
Exactly.
I've seen managers jump in and
Super
do the
rep.
job.
Super rep.
And
Yeah.
secondly, it actually creates more time for the manager because they have a structure and approach, and it takes a manager could take back about 15 hours a week. It's only my approach, is only like, it depends how many people you have, but 10 to 15% of a manager's time in doing the system I propose. And so you get back time. And then thirdly, you get emotional freedom, because a performance issue that goes bad is so emotionally
It's
taxing.
exhausting. Yeah. It's
Right.
exhausting.
And you're not emotionally free to be with the people that you love. So
Mhm.
there's just a lot of pragmatism in it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think this is one of the things that like we talk about quite a bit because our customer success team, works with hundreds and hundreds, I mean, at this point, thousands and thousands of sales managers, right, across hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of customers. And a really great way to make sure that you have space for those performance conversations is first, like, have a good operating rhythm, right? First and
Yes.
foremost, the crux of a good operating rhythm, kind of like the bedrock, is a manager rep one-on-one. And when I say a one-on-one, it's not a pipeline review, right? It's performance one-on-one. Um, and um, and so just making sure, because like if you let, it's like the camel with his nose in the tent. Like if you let pipeline review into the one-on-one, it's going to take up the whole one-on-one, right? So what I like to do is say, hey, let's keep pipeline review over here. It's an operational thing, right? Like it's important. We're going to do it, right? We're going to do, like, maybe, whether do we do a group forecast call or maybe do a group forecast call plus plus maybe a deal strategy session that's like focused on deals, but that's going to be hermetically sealed and different from our performance one-on-one. And the reason why is because like when we show up to this one, the job to be done is, hey, we're going to be talking about your performance. We're going to be like reviewing metrics, which are the aggregation of behaviors on deals, right? So we're going to be looking at like activity metrics, maybe stages reached, how much stage line how much pipeline is reaching different stages, whatever, in order to diagnose issues, which then may show up in deals, right? But like we're going to
Right.
be talking about aggregates here, and we're going to talk about emotions. We're going to talk about performance. So like ideally, what we're doing is at any given point in time, we're working on a thing, right? Like, hey, Bobby, like as we know, we're working on a pipeline hygiene improvement area for you, and we're measuring your untouched opportunities counts. And the good news is they've gotten better over the last month or so, but they're still not exactly where we want them to be, right? And so I know that we can do better on that because I know that Frankie over there and Susie over there, their untouched opportunities counts are down here, and they have a similar number of options. So I know it's doable. I know it's doable. We're going to get you there, right? And so just making sure that there's space on the calendar for that, and each rep is going to have a different proclivity, right? Bobby's got a pipeline hygiene problem, and Susie's got an activity problem, and what have you. And so we're going to focus on one thing that we're going to like then honey badger to success. But if you don't have the place on the calendar in order to do that, it's going to make it such that you're less likely to do it, because we have a saying here at Atrium that calendar is destiny. So like making sure that it's there like
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of provides the expectation, right? Like, oh, we're at our one-on-one where we talk about performance. I guess we better talk about performance. What are some other things that like some of the other performance centric conversations that section of the book talks about?
Yeah, so I also talk about non-metric based performance.
Mhm.
So, for example, I have the expectation that account relationship directors are able to get higher in the organization and broader. So, we'll look at a relationship map. So, if you have a company like, I don't know, Honeywell, let's say, okay, who are the
Not small.
executives? Well, or across a division, and go, okay, where do you want to target next? How can we help you get those relationships? And oftentimes we'll have to tap someone, like maybe it's our leader of HR, to meet with their HR leader, because a rep may not be able to get to that person on their own. So
Yep.
how do we help them get higher and broader?
Yep.
So that's absolutely an area. And then another one is if you're working, particularly in a large organization, but I would submit it's probably in all organizations, there's behavioral expectation of treating each other with
Mm.
respect and leading a team to mobilize resources on behalf of your customer. So, how do you do that? And are you acting in such a way that people want to work with you? And if not, it's a problem for an account director.
Yeah.
So, I usually have a cultural expectation as well.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be like non-metrical. I think one thing on the prior case there, one of the things, and I know that Helen, you were an engineer by background, so I'm sure the left side of your brain is fairly well developed. But I think it's one of those things where you're like you could probably instrument and like start and count a number of these things. So like as an example, it's actually fun. I mean, we at Atrium, we've added a bunch of like a big kind of focus for us over the last 12 months has been the ability for like larger organizations to customize the heck out of Atrium. Um, in order to be able to measure the things in addition to the core things that Atrium measures out of the box, like standard things like op ownership or pipeline or like win rates or meeting counts or whatever. But in some organizations, they're gonna have like a fussy little thing that's like unique to their business, right? And oftentimes what we do is we measure those as some sort of custom task or event or what have you in our CRM. um and so as you can this is a big like medpic thing, as well as like like meeting MIs, right? Like meaningful interactions, right? Or it could be like a meaningful executive interaction, or it could be an economic buyer meeting. Like, oh well, that's a meeting. No, this is a very 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 specific type of meeting where we're meeting with EB, right? Or and it could be any of these, like it could be any of these things. And so then like anytime there's some sort of key initiative, we see this a lot in our customers, is in addition to the specific things that a manager is, like, or like the unique thing that a manager is coaching with the rep, there's going to be like some sort of quarterly focus on like, all right, great, like we're having a big focus on pipe gen and self prospecting this quarter because our marketing budgets have been cut. So guess what, account executives, you're going to put your back into it. And so as a result, we're going to be measuring, we have an expectation that you have five self-sourced ops per per month. And of course, like what we want to see as a result is we want to see this amount of non-opportunity facing email, this many non-opportunity facing accounts being touched on a monthly basis, et cetera, et cetera. And then of course that goes into the measurement harness that is then used in those one-on-ones. What is one of your way, like, how do you on the latter part around, like, are you a good participant in the team and what have you? What are the mechanisms by which you instrument that, like, obviously not in a non-metrical capacity, but how you kind of keep your finger on that, especially in larger teams, right? When you have
Yeah.
like especially if you're a second level leader and you've got like 40 reps, coming into you through 5 managers, how do you kind of keep your eye on that?
Yeah, so I will, solicit feedback from colleagues and from extended team members on how it is working, how the team is functioning and how things are going. I will also often get unsolicited feedback, and that can be a red flag. The
Yeah.
other thing too is I get copied on emails. So if I see emails going back between other parts of the organization, kind of like finger pointing, not my problem, or we need this, or what have you, I'll call a timeout and get on a video call and get the parties involved. So email does not equal communication in my book. And literally in my book, but also it's in my practice.
It's a good
And
place to memorialize things that have
yeah,
been discussed live. But guess what? Like the nonverbal communication that happens via synchronous video conversation is very different than the textual communication that happens via email or even Slack or Teams or whatever. There's so much lost, so much nuance, and so much nuance is lost. So like, yeah, trying to execute those things over email can be fraud.
yes, for sure. And so that can be an indicator of how the team is working together. But
Mhm.
it's usually not, again, binary. Usually there's a piece that the sales team needs to do and customer success and what have you. And so problem solving, keeping the customer's issue at the center or the deal issue at the center. And
Mhm.
in fact, you convey so much more in a verbal conversation. There's the tone, gestures. It's like I think it's 1 second of a verbal conversation does a job, or it's 10 seconds of a verbal conversation does a job of 40 emails.
I
Like
buy
10
it.
seconds. I mean, when you think of the bits of information communicated. So those are some indicators of cultural or team challenges. And then I'll feed it back to my team member, get their perspective. And I have put people on performance improvement plans for cultural gaps.
Mhm.
And so that's, if you don't address cultural behaviors that aren't consistent with the culture, then you really don't have a culture.
Yeah. I think that's also, I mean, like, yeah, it's always tough with high performing folks who are high bookings performing folks who don't toe the line when it comes to like behavioral, right? Like, being a nice teammate and what have you. But it's the way that I view it is very similar to what you were talking about before, is like we can't be a super rep, right? Like as a manager, we have to get up and we have to get leverage, right? And like, spread our time across 8 reps or 10 reps or what have you. Similarly, we have to be the minder of the culture. And so if we're allowing one person to like pee in the pool, then nobody's going to want to swim in there, right? And so like that's the thing that we like. So even you're like, oh man, but like they're at like 150% of their book is like cool. But if you lose 2 people in seat, or like you lose another person who's at 80% or 90%, like a solid contributor, and now you've got a 0 for their book, like that's a huge problem, right? And so
Yeah,
like
and
that's something you have to be mindful of.
yeah, you also don't know what actually could be possible if people were playing their job without being the super seller, because I think there's an opportunity cost that's unrecognized if you just focus on them being 150% of quota.
Yeah, for sure. The last thing I wanted to touch on was manager empowerment or manager enablement. And so I think we're talking about like um, so far we've been talking about how to like the tasks to do as a manager to be a very effective frontline manager. But then you get up a level what made me think about this is, as a second level leader, trying to like keep your fingers on the pulse is like very difficult. That's why obviously like metrics is super important. The other thing too is that you really need to work through your managers, right? Like
Yes.
and give them leverage. And then of course what that means, of course, is making sure that all of them have read Helen's book, obviously. And then what it can mean a number of other things too, like making sure that they are effectively enabled. And this is something that my friend Corey Bray talks about all the time, is like we have these sales enablement programs, and oftentimes what people think about when they think about sales enablement is they think about rep enablement, like making sure that people have their disco call or their disco questions nailed, making sure that onboarding is good, et cetera. But like we'll promote a rep into management and be like, cool, have fun, right? And not have a manager enablement program. What are some of the mechanisms that you would recommend folks, like leaders who are joining us today, to be thinking about when it comes to giving their managers leverage?
Yeah, so I mean, you have to again have clear expectations for the managers, what you expect, and also be willing to coach. I think a manager enablement is a underfunded and
Hugely.
underappreciated enablement category. So a lot of that then falls on more senior leaders. But one of the key things is to be super clear to have your managers delegate to their team and help them see that they don't have to do it all. And when I first became a manager, I thought I had to tell my team what to do, and then I quickly realized I need to set outcome based expectations and then
Mm-hmm.
support them and track, to track progress. But it's a really tricky thing because there's very little that I'm aware of in leadership enablement. So a lot of it ends up being homegrown within an organization. And I
Mm-hmm.
always do a buddy situation and mentoring and make sure that more experienced leaders are working with a new leader.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, one of the things that we do here at Atrium, because like we're, all about the sales managers, as because that's who uses our software in order to measure and manage their teams. And so the more effective they can be, the better out, like the better they'll be able to use analytics and software, analytics and metrics in order to measure and then improve the performance of their teams. We're big fans of books, right? We make sure that like we're handing out people like, because sales management books are less common. I'm glad it's actually becoming more common. People like to write, like there's the challenger sale, or like the jolt effect, or spin selling, or what have you, gap selling. And it's the funny thing about it is it's kind of similar to the focus that we have as sales managers on deals. It's like, here's how to close deals better, here's how to close deals better, here's a book on how to close deals better, versus, hey, let's make our humans better, right? Let's not coach the play, let's coach the players. Some of my favorite books there, obviously, Michelle's Crushing Quota is a very hands-on version of sales management. Love Your Team is obviously fantastic. The 5 Secrets of the Sales Coach, and of course, if you want to learn about measurement of measuring teams or measuring sellers, cracking the sales management code, of course, is like the big one. So like that's one of the things that we do, is we provide these to the customers, because like it turns out, like, if you're managing, let's say you're managing 8 reps, right? That's probably, anywhere between $1 to $2 million of salary expense plus commission a year, and you're probably looking at like anywhere between $5 to $10 million of like quota. A $20 book is probably like pretty helpful when it comes to that. So, well, Helen, any sort of like parting shots that you might recommend to our audience here, aside from making sure to sign up to get a copy of Love Your Team?
Yeah, I would say that sales is human and relationship. It's not transactional. Yes, we transact, but first and foremost, it's about the people. So focusing on your team, finding out what they care about, supporting them, and then addressing underperformers.
Yep. Wonderful. Well, Helen, thank you very much for joining us. This was super fantastic. And folks, if you haven't signed up for a copy of Helen's of Helen's book, please go ahead and do that. I think we'll drop a link in the chat here so folks can get their copy. So thanks so much, and stick around for the next session after this, and I'm sure you're going to love that too. Take care.
Thank you.